Atlanta Press Club Debates 2008, the race for the 10th Congressional District, is brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Here is the moderator for tonight's debate.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Rayam, an anchor and reporter for Fox 5 Atlanta, and I want to welcome you to our 2008 election campaign debates, originating from the studios of GPB. Tonight's debate is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. We also want to welcome the statewide audience of GPB's radio network, which is simulcasting this debate, and our online audience at gpb.org. Now, the time has come to meet the candidates facing each other in the election for the 10th Congressional District. They are in alphabetical order. Paul Broun is a Republican incumbent from the 10th Congressional District, and Bobby Saxon, an Iraq War combat veteran and small business owner. Gentlemen, welcome. Here is the format for tonight's debate. In the first round, each candidate will answer 2 questions from our 3 panelists. In the second round, the candidates will ask each other 2 questions apiece. And in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, each candidate will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. Now, before we get started, let's meet our 3 panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Brandon Larrabee, a reporter with Morris News. Next is Blake Aeud, a reporter with the Athens Banner Herald. And our third panelist is Bridget Williams, an anchor with WAGT-TV NBC in Augusta. Now, the time has come to get started with the debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked 2 questions by our panelists. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer each question by random selection. Paul Broun gets the first question from Brandon Larrabee. Mr. Larrabee.
Representative Brown, you voted against the bailout bill twice, but Senators Saxby Chambliss and Johnny Isakson, both Republicans, voted for the measure. Now, Senator Chambliss said his opponent, Jim Martin, who didn't support the bailout, was, quote, in favor of sticking his head in the sand, allowing the stock market to tank. Was Senator Chambliss's criticism of Jim Martin accurate? And if so, how were your votes against the bailout any different?
Well, I did not support the bailout, and I did indeed vote against it twice. In fact, the comments I made about it have been very public. I talked about it being a cow pie with some marshmallow in it, and that I wasn't going to eat that pie. And it did not change. It puts the taxpayer on the hook to bail out the Wall Street bankers who created this mess to begin with. It doesn't put any type of reform in the process either. So it was a bad bill. We had alternatives that would allow the private sector to stop this credit freeze that we have. It would reform the process. It was a bill or a set of legislation that would solve the problem, and when it would do it in the private sector. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is to save taxpayers money. We can't continue to put more and more pressure on people's pocketbooks. And I'm trying to save people's money, and that's exactly the reason I voted the way that I did.
Blake Aeud, moving on to you. You may ask your question for Bobby Saxon.
Mr. Saxon, both you and Congressman Brown have said that you are not in favor of, quote, cutting and running in Iraq. Can you explain how your position is different from your opponents?
I don't know that it's necessarily different from my opponents, but it's not as my opponent tries to characterize it. My opponent has run around the district and talking about liberals wanting to cut out of Iraq. I spent a year in Iraq as the battle major for the 3rd Infantry Division. I know what it's like to be shot at, and I know what it's like to see people die. There is absolutely no way that I would ever cut and run or put up a white flag in Iraq. It is absolutely critical that we support our troops in Iraq and that we continue our mission in Iraq until we can indeed claim victory. Now, I have said since day one that we had to have responsible reduction of our troops in Iraq. To me, that means that we have to start bringing home our combat troops and forcing the Iraqi security forces to stand up and be accountable for their country. We need to take our troops out of harm's way and make Iraqis responsible for their country.
Mr. Brown, this warrants a rebuttal.
Well, he's changed his position. Actually, initially he suggested that he was in favor of an immediate withdrawal of the troops. That's cutting and running. He also talked about he's in favor of timelines. That's totally irresponsible. It will invite the people who are hating America, wanting to destroy America, to bomb our cities, do things, it would absolutely create more havoc in America. And that cut and run and timelines is just totally irresponsible. And that's what he promoted.
Gentlemen, thank you. Bridget Williams, it is your turn to ask Paul Broun a question.
Mr. Broun, a few weeks ago, Georgia hit a 16-year high with its unemployment rate. And we know that when you went into office, you talked about bringing more jobs to Georgia. What is your stance on that at this point as the numbers continue to rise?
It's critical for the 10th Congressional District to bring jobs here, and I've been working very hard to do so. In fact, I've set up some committees throughout the district to try to help me in helping them to bring jobs to communities like Toccoa. For instance, we have a great need for a sewage system in Stevens County, also in Banks County, and I'm working to try to get the funding for those systems. We have to work with the Chamber of Commerce, the development authorities, the elected representatives, and I've been doing that. I've developed all these councils that I'm working with as their partner. And the best way that we can bring jobs here is to cut taxes, get the tax burden and the regulatory burden off of small business. That's the economic engine of America. Get those burdens off so that we can create more jobs, that we can have a stronger economy here in America. And I'm working very hard in Washington as well as in the district to do just exactly that.
Mr. Saxon, the unemployment rate is on the minds of many. Your rebuttal.
Well, first of all, I'd like to go back to my opponent's statement earlier about the cut and run. My opponent has run around the district misleading people on lots of things, not just on my record. As a combat veteran, Congressman Brown, I assure you that I have never in any way indicated that cutting and running is a part of any strategy that I have promoted or that I support. So please be careful with what kind of misleading statements you're making when it comes to me. Now, back to your question when it comes to the economy. I'm a small business owner. I'm a guy that believes that we have to support small businesses.
Mr. Saxon, we'll have to stop you there. Your time is up. Brandon Larrabee, you may ask the final question for Bobby Saxon.
Yes, sir. Your opponent is a co-sponsor of the fair tax, a proposal that would replace most of the taxes Americans now pay with a 23 or 30% sales tax, depending on how you calculate it. You have been quoted as saying you, quote, like the fair tax, but are, quote, not a supporter of the fair tax in its current form. What did you mean by that, and what changes would you like to see in the proposal?
Well, I believe everyone in this country is in support of fair taxes, and most people in this country aren't particularly fond of the IRS. But in reading the book, the proposal on the fair tax, I saw several flaws in there. First of all is that a lot of people don't understand that 23% sales tax that they're talking about out there only replaces federal taxes. It doesn't replace statewide taxes. So you're still paying state income taxes, you're still paying state taxes when you go purchase something, as well as you're still paying property taxes out there. So we need to make sure that everyone clearly understands that. Also, there's an assumption in the fair tax that immediately upon implementation that 23% tax, when it's implemented, that the 23% of taxes involved in the purchase of items out there will go away. I don't believe that. And I believe that I need to work with Congressman John Linder to make sure that these are addressed before I could actually support the bill.
Mr. Broun, taxes on the minds of many. You have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, I'm an ardent supporter of the fair tax. It will lower the cost of all goods and services. It will eliminate the Internal Revenue Service. It will get rid of all those hidden taxes, such as corporate taxes, death taxes, and all those types of things that drive up the cost of all goods and services in America. It's an issue whose time is past due. I have pledged to the fair tax people in Washington to work to develop a grassroots groundswell of support all over this country to promote the fair tax, to get rid of the IRS and leave tax dollars in people's pockets.
Gentlemen, thank you. That concludes round one. It's now time for our candidates to ask each other 2 questions. Now you have 15 seconds for the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for rebuttal. By random selection, Paul Broun asks the first question. Mr. Broun.
Mr. Saxon, I'm voting for John McCain for president. Would you please tell us tonight who you're going to vote for president? And if you're elected to Congress, will you vote for Nancy Pelosi to be the Speaker of the House?
Congressman Brown, as I have gone around this district and I have talked to people who have asked me about the actual issues in this district, when I talk about health care, when I talk about the economy, when I talk about Iraq, when they see that I have actually sound principles and sound plans for what I'm going to do in those, and if they are an extremist like yourself, then they want to try to point me and tie me to someone else on the national political agenda out there. I am running for Congress against you. On November the 4th, I'm going to vote for Bobby Saxon.
Well, it's obvious that he won't tell us because he is going to vote. If he's a Democrat, he's got to vote for Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House. And what he's going to do in doing so is he's going to lock in place a liberal socialist agenda that's going to raise taxes for everybody in this district, in this state, in this nation. It's going to create more and more regulation. I've seen it over and over again. If he's elected, he's going to promote a socialist agenda in the U.S. House of Representatives. He has no other choice. And that's the reason he doesn't want to answer this question, is because he doesn't want to admit to the public that that's what he's going to do.
Bobby Saxon, you may now ask Paul Broun your first question.
Congressman Brown, you have repeatedly referred to yourself as a pre-Vietnam era Marine. Yet you were a Marine reservist from 1964 to 1967. And during that time, nearly 20,000 brave Americans died fighting for this country in Vietnam. Will you look into that camera and tell the people of the 10th District why you've misled them about your military record?
Bobby, you're so full of it. I'll tell you, you've just not only impugned me, but every single person who served in the military who did not go to war. You've claimed that you're a real vet and that I'm not. That's a bunch of hogwash. The thing is, I joined the Marine Corps Reserves in early 1964. Vietnam wasn't even an issue. We were concerned about Cuba at the time. People hadn't heard about Vietnam. I was in medical school when Tet occurred and all of the things occurred in Vietnam. I didn't get a chance to go. But I served my country ably and well. I was in the Marine Corps. When I was accepted to medical school, the medical school made me get out of active Marine Reserve, so I had a commission in the Navy as a general medical officer. I went on active duty in the Navy between my freshman and sophomore year of medical school. I put on a uniform. I served my nation, and I find it totally detestable for you to sit here and say that me and anybody else who didn't go to war is not a real veteran and is not a real patriot. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Mr. Saxon, your rebuttal.
Congressman Brown, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I didn't say that serving as a reservist was dishonorable. I'm a National Guardsman. I think it can be very honorable. I think walking around this district and misleading people about when you actually served is dishonorable. Now, you said it wasn't a real war in 1964. 206 people died in Vietnam in 1964. Do you think that their families don't think it was a real war? In this year, 147 people have died in Afghanistan. Because less people died in Vietnam in that particular year, you think
Mr.
we don't have a war in
Saxon,
Afghanistan?
Your time is up. Moving on. Congressman Brown, you may ask your second question.
Mr. Saxon, you claim to be a conservative. Yes, you support abortion. You're not for the Second Amendment. You support a bailout of Wall Street bankers and put the bill on the taxpayers' back. You support socialized medicine, and you're going to support Nancy Pelosi and her radical leftist agenda. You're the extreme person. How in the world can you tell the people of this district that you're conservative?
Well, first of all, Paul, I don't know where you got the fact that I don't support the Second Amendment. My mother, who's in the audience tonight, gave me my first shotgun when I was 12 years old. And I've added more than a dozen guns to that since then. I'm a proud owner of a sportsman's license because I hunt throughout the entire year. I have told everyone that I talk to I support the Second Amendment. Secondly, I'm a pro-life person who believes in a pro-choice agenda because the Constitution gives a woman that right. And you claim to support the Constitution, but you only support the pieces of the Constitution that you like. You don't support the entire Constitution out there. You are an extremist. When you look at your agenda and what you have done in Congress, you have failed to do anything that benefits the people of the 10th District.
Congressman Brown, your rebuttal.
Well, Mr. Saxon's pro-abortion. He supports killing unborn babies. He did not fill out the questionnaire for the NRA nor the Gun Owners of America. which means he cannot support a pro-Second Amendment agenda. There are a lot of these pro-hunter folks that have guns that don't support the Second Amendment. I believe in the Constitution and everything that it says. I have it right here in my pocket.
I have one
and well, thank you for carrying it now since I've been promoting that. But Mr. Saxon, there's no right for abortion in the Constitution.
Excuse me.
You don't understand the Constitution.
Time for a rebuttal is up, Mr. Brown. Bobby Saxon, you may now ask your second question.
Congressman Brown, a dear friend of mine once said, when the words and actions don't line up, follow the actions. You claim that you're a representative for all the people in the district, yet you continue to fail to support children, teachers, farmers, women's, and
ask your question,
especially
please, Mr.
veterans.
Saxon.
How do your actions line up with your words?
Well, here's another falsehood that Mr. Saxon's promoting here. America's made promises to veterans, and the American government has broken those promises, and I'm working very hard to make those promises be fulfilled. I'm a medical doctor. I've done everything that I can to support children, and I will continue to do so. I used to farm, drive the tractor, plow the fields farm. If America cannot feed itself, if it cannot clothe itself, if we're not energy independent as a nation, then we're not a secure nation. I'm working in all those areas to make America a secure nation. I'm also working to leave dollars in people's pockets, to get the regulatory burden off of business and industry, and get it so that we can run our lives without all this government intrusion. So I'm working for the people of this district to get the federal government out of the way so that you can run your life without all the government intrusion.
Mr. Saxon, your rebuttal.
Well, Congressman Brown, again, you make a great speech what you actually do, but again, I'm talking about actual actions here. You have voted against veterans on 3 separate occasions. You have voted against children's health care. You have voted against farmers. And you've introduced an amendment that directly goes against a woman and her choice out there. You mentioned earlier the sewer system up in Stevens County. I was in Toccoa on Tuesday night doing a debate, one of the many that you've refused to show up for. The people in Stevens County told me that they don't have a sewer system because you're not doing your job.
Mr. Saxon, your time is up. Gentlemen, thank you for your liveliness this round. That includes our second round of questioning. For our third round, we return to our panel of journalists who will ask questions of the candidates of his or her choice. Candidates will be allowed 1 minute to respond. And as moderator, I will determine if the opposing candidate will be given 30 seconds for rebuttal. We begin this round with a question from Blake Aeud. Mr. Aeud.
Congressman Brown, you've said as recently as May that you support privatizing Social Security. Has the recent fluctuations in the stock market changed your opinion?
Well, your statement is not exactly correct. What I've said is we've got to fix Social Security. We have an elderly population today that's dependent upon it. We need to fulfill those promises that we've made to the elderly, and there's no question about that. But a young person like yourself who's coming into the Social Security system today is not going to see Social Security if we don't fix it. And what I'd like to do is give young people options. A good example is that I'm working on a bill right now in Washington that we'll introduce hopefully 1st of next year that will give you and others an option of being able to take some of those Social Security taxes and invest it in your own home. We've got to stop Congress from spending the Social Security Trust Fund. The Social Security Trust Fund has $0 in it today. It's all been spent. I think that's criminal. Congress has spent our money. It's my money, it's your money. Nobody will argue that Social Security Trust Fund is on a course of bankruptcy. We've got to fix it, and I want to do everything that we can to do so, and I'm looking for those answers in Congress.
Mr. Saxon, your rebuttal.
The problem with the Social Security system right now is that it's going broke, and politicians won't stand up and tell people the truth. It's extremely difficult to fix, and we have to go to Congress, statesmen, not politicians, and we're going to either have to increase the Social Security tax, we're going to have to extend the amount of time that you can before you can retire, or we're going to have to make sure that that people cannot get the tax at an early enough age. Just cutting me off back there. I support Social Security. I will support expanding and growing and safeguarding
Mr.
Social
Saxon,
Security.
your time is up. Moving on to Bridget Williams. She will ask the next question.
My question is for Mr. Saxon. It has been very clear in many of the articles I've read on both of you that you both have Christian values. My question is, how will your faith play into how you will handle your leadership role?
Well, my faith is very important to me, and I think that faith should be important in the life of a congressman or a senator or a president up there. But I also believe that an elected representative's job is to enforce, enhance, and work with the Constitution. Now, my opponent talks about carrying a copy of the Constitution. I believe as a Christian that I should use the core of who I am and the core of my Christian values to guide me. But I also believe that I can't let those values override the original intent of the Constitution of our forefathers, that everyone in this country is created equal, and that everyone has equal rights, and that although I would love for everyone to be a Christian, in our country you don't have to be a Christian.
Mr. Brown, your reply.
Well, it's ironic that my opponent keeps talking about the Constitution, the original intent, when he promotes ideas that are not constitutional according to the original intent. For instance, he promotes abortion as a woman's right under the Constitution. You won't find that in the Constitution at all. That's not there. And by the way, I want to just say, if you've decided, if you've moved from your original statement of wanting to immediately withdraw troops, I'm glad you're coming over to my side.
Excuse me, Mr. Brown, your 30 seconds are up. Thank you.
Can do what we need to.
Brandon Larrabee, it's your turn to ask a question.
Congressman, several media reports have said that you were close to running out of money in your office budget as of June 30th, and you admitted that, quote, some management decisions were discovered that had adversely affected the budget. What changes have you made to avoid a shortfall, and why should your constituents trust you to work on the federal budget if you have trouble controlling your own office's spending?
Well, this whole budget issue has been actually manufactured. It kind of blindsided me. I had a chief of staff who was minding the budget, and I was getting reports from him all along. We haven't busted our budget, and we're not going to. In fact, at the end of the day, we're going to return money back to the taxpayers after this year is over. We planned how we were going to spend our money. We've spent it according to what we needed to do. My chief of staff has left, but that didn't have anything to do with busting our budget or anything else like that. We're on our budget. We're going to return money to the taxpayers, and it's totally manufactured issue that's just been blown out of proportion because it's not factual.
Mr. Saxon, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
My opponent spent nearly $600,000 in the second quarter of this year so-called communicating with his constituents because he said it was so important that he communicate. He thought communicating with his constituents was important leading up to his Republican primary. Since that primary, and when you look at his last quarter budget, he didn't spend one single dime communicating either with a town hall meeting or with a mailer out there. Again, words and actions. When the words and actions don't line up, look at the actions.
I want to say something about that because what Mr. Saxon just does not understand is that under federal law, we can't mail out 90 days from election. We can't do the town halls 90 days from election, so we had to spend all the money communicating with I say my patients because I kind of feel like them that way, but with my constituents before the 15th of April.
We have to stop you there.
Okay.
Time is running out. We thank you both. We have no more time for questions. Both candidates for the 10th Congressional District will now have 30 seconds for a closing statement. Paul Broun was randomly selected to make the first statement. Congressman Brown.
I view the federal government as this huge ball of twine of socialism that's been wrapped strand by strand over the years. And I'm working in Washington to unwrap those strands, to leave tax dollars in your pocket, to get the federal regulatory burden off of business and industry so we can have a strong economy. I believe in personal accountability and responsibility. I don't believe in socialism, and I'm fighting socialism tooth and toenail in Washington. And I'll do everything I can to make sure that you have the dollars and can run your life without all the government intrusion. Please vote for me.
Bobby Saxon, your turn for a closing statement.
Thank you. 14 years ago, Charlie Norwood stood up and ran for Congress in this district. Like Charlie, we share some same values. We're both Christians, we're both combat veterans, both small business owners, and like my opponent likes to call me, we're both outsiders. If you want another congressman who will represent everyone in this district, who will work in a conservative, bipartisan way to represent you, please vote for Bobby Saxon on Election Day. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. This concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the general election will be held on Tuesday, November 4th. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. Now, for more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit www.atlantapressclub.org. The debate will be archived on the Press Club's website. I'm Lisa Rayam. Thanks so much for joining us for this 2008 election debate.
This program was funded in part by a grant from the late Tom Watson Brown and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.